In the beginning, a young girl named Savina clutched her ailing mother's hand, weeping inconsolably, her heart filled with confusion and despair, unable to understand how things had come to this. Her father was gone, and now her mother was gravely ill. She was determined not to lose her too. Savina vowed to save her mother. She then journeyed to the Charlotte estate, where the butler, upon seeing her, knocked on Benjamin Charlotte's office door. Benjamin mistook her for a maid applicant, but she confidently clarified that she was not. She then placed a necklace on his desk, which startled Benjamin as he recognized it. He recalled that it had belonged to Liam Charlotte, Savina's father. Benjamin inquired about her mother, and Savina replied that her name was Renata, and she had been a maid in the Charlotte household. He then understood their connection. Benjamin sighed, remarking that it must have been true love, and dismissed the butler, who bowed respectfully and left. Benjamin asked Savina how her mother had fared since Liam's death. Savina explained that, like many single mothers in the empire, her mother had endured immense hardship and poverty. Savina knew that while others might offer pity, the Charlotte family would likely scorn them, disgusted by her mother's status as a mere maid. Despite this, Savina believed this was her only hope, and she was determined to do whatever it took to restore her mother's health. She pleaded with Benjamin to save her mother, though she knew he was unlikely to help. Benjamin responded coldly, reminding her that because Liam had left home for love, the family had lost its heir and he had lost his brother. Therefore, he had no reason to help her. Savina countered that she was his brother's only child, the true Charlotte blood remaining, which might offer some solace. She promised that if he saved her mother, she would move into the family manor, live quietly, and sever all ties with her past. Benjamin sternly warned Savina that if she chose this path, she would never see her mother again, not even once. Savina gazed at him silently, firmly stating that she was prepared to make the sacrifice. Benjamin was struck by her resolve. He then asked her name and age. Savina replied, Savina, 8 years old, her expression solemn. Benjamin declared that from now on, she would be known as Savina Rolled to Charlotte, and promised to save her mother. He urged her never to forget the weight of this new name, the honor her father had failed to uphold. Meanwhile, the butler reported Savina's arrival to her grandfather. The old man stated indifferently that he had no interest in Liam's daughter. The butler apologized for not bringing her to see him first, citing concern for his health, but the grandfather dismissed it. He bitterly recalled Liam, deeming him a foolish son who had disappointed him by ruining the family. In his memory, Liam had argued vehemently with him, insisting that he was wrong, while the grandfather angrily rebuked Liam for falling in love with a commoner, warning him that he would regret it. Savina's grandfather had assumed Liam would struggle and eventually return to beg for forgiveness, but that hope died with Liam 13 years ago. 3 years later, the scene shifts to the Charlotte Manor, where the maids are conversing. A maid named Melissa confesses that she had to slip out of the dining room because the atmosphere was too tense, particularly the former Duke's harsh treatment of Miss Savina. Another maid finds it normal, saying the Duke has always been harsh toward Savina. They discuss why he dislikes her so much, considering her a failure as a member of the Charlotte family. Melissa asks what that means, and the other maid explains that the Charlotte family has a generations-old legacy of powerful water magic. Both the current Duke and Liam, Savina's father, were highly skilled in this magic, so everyone naturally assumed Savina would inherit this talent. But even though she has reached the age of 10, the age when such talents typically manifest, she shows no sign of it. Therefore, people attribute her lack of magical talent to her mother's lowly bloodline. During a tense dinner, Savina's grandfather suddenly berates her for always wearing the same clothes, despite being given ample money to buy new ones. He accuses her of shaming the Charlotte family, implying that others might mock them because of it. Startled and nervous, Savina quickly promises to be more mindful. Inwardly, she knows that every time she tries to wear new clothes, it's her grandfather who criticizes her. She has become accustomed to such treatment. Since moving into the manor, it has become routine. After all, she knows that in her grandfather's eyes, she is nothing more than the bastard child left behind by his deceased son. Meanwhile, Benjamin informs his father that the prince is coming to visit, and he plans to have the prince stay in a room at the end of the second-floor corridor. The grandfather acknowledges this and emphasizes that being entrusted with the prince's education by His Majesty is a great honor. He instructs Benjamin to ensure the prince receives a warm welcome. After Benjamin agreed, Savina's grandfather coldly informed her that her room would be moved to the annex and ordered her not to appear in public. When the prince arrived, if she happened to encounter him, she must pretend to be a maid. This deeply hurt Savina, who understood that her grandfather was ashamed of having a granddaughter of common birth. Nevertheless, she silently accepted, reminding herself that enduring all of this was for her mother's treatment. As the conversation shifted, grandfather mentioned the impending visit of the prince, fifth Prince Ricardo. Savina was shocked upon hearing this. Her expression clearly panicked. Unable to process the news, she excused herself, claiming a stomach ache. Grandfather allowed her to leave. She politely bowed and turned to go. Her thoughts in turmoil, Savina began to feel physically ill, panic rising in her chest. She recognized the name Ricardo as the perverse prince from a book her friend had written. At first, she thought she had simply been reborn, but now everything was aligning more and more with the plot of the novel. She recalled the rumors about the fifth prince, that he had a violent temper and even enjoyed the sight of blood while hunting, possessing chillingly indifferent eyes despite his young age. Savina had initially scoffed at the idea, believing it impossible for her to become a character in a novel. But she couldn't ignore the startling similarities between reality and the story. Treated coldly as an illegitimate child in a noble family, now she faced Prince Ricardo. Just like in her past life, Savina had read a novel called the Cesario Chronicles, which told the tragic childhood of the unloved Prince Ricardo Gale de Cesario, who upon reaching adulthood was sent to the battlefield to fight monsters. There, he met the saintly heroine and was saved by her. In the end, Ricardo defeated the great demon, became emperor, married the saint, and lived happily ever after. At the time, Savina had found the male protagonist too bland and complained to her friend, saying that a kind man with a tragic past wasn't suitable for a modern story. When her friend, the author, asked for her opinion, Savina suggested making the protagonist cold and indifferent, perfect in every way, only learning emotions because of the heroine's appearance. Savina also remembered a time in her past life when her friend, the author of the novel, asked her why Savina, the character, had more scenes than the heroine. She casually suggested making the male lead a cold-blooded pervert. She even suggested having the male lead personally kill Savina, adding psychological trauma and depth to his character. Her friend loved the idea and modified the plot accordingly. But later, Savina became angry that her friend had casually taken other people's suggestions and changed the story, especially turning the male lead into a pervert. Every time she woke up from a dream about that novel, Savina would gasp for breath, realizing with terror that she had been reincarnated into that novel, destined to be killed by the emotionally detached Prince Ricardo Gale de Cesario. Savina recalled that after her friend took her advice and made the novel's plot darker, it became very popular. And now, she was horrified to discover that she had become a character in the book. She believed her lack of magical talent was because she wasn't the original Savina from the book. With the terrifying fifth prince about to arrive, she became anxious, desperately searching for a way to prevent the novel's tragedy, desperately trying to avoid the prince and her own doom. At that moment, a woman suddenly burst into her room, scolding her for missing class. Savina was startled to recognize Lady Clarissa and nervously tried to explain, only to be told that the class had been changed to the morning and that the maid had already informed her. Savina was frustrated. No one had told her about the change, and she felt that having class at 7 in the morning was unreasonable, but she knew arguing was pointless. As soon as she sat down, Lady Clarissa reminded her that she was merely following the former Duke's, Savina's grandfather, Duke Charlotte's, orders. He was extremely persistent about her education. This persistence gave Lady Clarissa immense authority in the classroom. Her word was final. Savina reflected that if anyone could drive her to the brink of collapse, it was Clarissa. Clarissa had indeed helped her catch up on all her lessons in 3 years. But Savina believed it wasn't due to good teaching, but because Clarissa was always watching her like a hawk, forcing her to fill the large cup. As Savina struggled to lift the heavy cup, but couldn't steady it, Clarissa suddenly struck her hand with a stick, criticizing her grip. Despite the pain in her hand, Savina endured it without showing it. Just then, a worried maid rushed in with a wet towel to attend to her. Clarissa smugly taunted Savina for not following instructions properly. Furious, Savina slammed her cup down, startling Clarissa, and glared at her. When Clarissa questioned her rebellious look, Savina calmly replied that her words were unbecoming of a teacher. Clarissa, offended, accused Savina of shifting the blame and scoffed that a true member of the Charlotte family would never make such a mistake. Distraught and at her wit's end, Savina recalled how she had endured the abuse, hoping to avoid being hated and to one day see her mother. Now, she knew she was destined to die at the hands of the prince. Realizing no one would protect her, she decided she could no longer tolerate the mistreatment. She boldly stood up. Picking up her teacup, she casually threw it to the ground, shattering it and leaving Clarissa stunned. With newfound confidence, Savina declared Clarissa fired for laying her hands on her. Shocked, Clarissa tried to justify her actions as heartfelt teaching, but Savina firmly corrected her, demanding to be addressed as Miss Savina, leaving Clarissa speechless. Savina firmly told Clarissa she was no longer her teacher, asserting that Clarissa was unqualified to teach anyone. Shocked and anxious, Clarissa tried to argue, but Savina confidently instructed the maid. Melissa, though hesitant, escorted Clarissa away. Enraged, Clarissa attacked Melissa with magic, causing her to collapse. Savina, alarmed, realized Clarissa's dangerous nature. Clarissa maliciously mocked Savina's desire for respect. Comparing Savina to her mother, she insulted her birth, calling her vulgar and low-born, claiming her efforts to erase Savina's background were wasted. Clarissa continued to insult her mother and lineage, never missing an opportunity to demean her. With a playful smile, Savina retorted, implying Clarissa had been in love with her father. She explained that Clarissa was originally betrothed to him, but he eloped with her mother, breaking the engagement. While Savina had assumed Clarissa's resentment stemmed from that betrayal, she noted Clarissa's hatred was always directed solely at her mother. Savina further taunted, speculating that Clarissa truly loved her father, not just his status, as she hadn't married a duke in the end. Clarissa, flushed with anger, roared at Savina to shut up, demanding how she dared speak to her that way. The tension escalated as Clarissa threatened Savina. She warned Savina of severe consequences if the former Duke Charlotte learned of their conflict, momentarily stunning Savina. Clarissa harshly reminded Savina that she was personally hired by the former Duke, while Savina's mother was cast out. This momentarily swayed Savina, acknowledging the former Duke's undeniable authority, but she quickly regained her composure. She firmly retorted that the one being cast out now would be Clarissa. Savina confidently questioned if Clarissa truly believed the Duke would cast out a direct descendant of the Charlotte family. Then, in a calm yet sarcastic tone, Savina added that she was glad her father chose her mother, as he would have been miserable married to Clarissa. Increasingly anxious, Clarissa demanded she stop, but Savina just laughed, saying she finally understood why her father abandoned Clarissa and eloped with her mother. Clarissa, enraged, called Savina the daughter of a low-born woman and raised her hand to strike her. Savina, fearing the blow, closed her eyes, only to be surprised when nothing happened. Opening her eyes, she saw Clarissa frozen, Benjamin having suddenly entered the room. His presence immediately shifted the atmosphere, making Clarissa nervous. Benjamin sternly questioned what she was doing. Though Clarissa attempted to explain, he cut her off and told her to leave. Visibly intimidated, Clarissa obeyed. Benjamin gently told Savina to return to her room and wait, as he needed to speak with Clarissa. Nervous and unsure of Benjamin's stance, Savina quietly agreed, watching them leave. Afterwards, Melissa rushed to Savina's side, worried about her well-being. Savina realized Melissa had likely reported the incident to the Duke. Believing the Duke might be displeased with Clarissa, Savina gathered her courage and went to Benjamin's office. Upon arrival, she respectfully asked if he had summoned her. Benjamin nodded, asking her to explain the morning's events. Surprised and slightly nervous, Savina wondered if Benjamin had believed Clarissa's side of the story. But she quickly reminded herself that Clarissa was the one at fault, not her. Savina clenched her fists and demanded to know what Benjamin needed to discuss. Benjamin then told her that Clarissa claimed she had been fired for avoiding her lessons after Savina had flown into a rage and insulted her. When Benjamin questioned her, Savina asked him directly if he believed Clarissa's story. Benjamin calmly replied that it depended on her explanation, as he couldn't make a judgment based on only one side of the story. Savina felt disappointed, reflecting on how foolish she had been to expect him to take her side. To prove her point, she slightly lifted her skirt, revealing the burn on her leg, which startled Benjamin. She explained that during a tea ceremony lesson, while holding a teacup about the same size as the one in front of him, Madame Clarissa had struck the back of her hand with a stick, criticizing her posture. Startled, Savina had spilled the hot tea, burning her leg. Finally, she mentioned Clarissa's previous engagement to her father and asked Benjamin if he could truly be certain that Clarissa's actions weren't motivated by personal resentment. Benjamin sighed and sat down, telling Savina that it would be best to assign her a new teacher. He assured her that the doctor would treat her burn upon his return. He also instructed her to tell him immediately if anything similar happened again. Savina reflected on his words, thinking that his use of next time sounded strange, as if he were suddenly willing to listen to her. Deep down, however, she still felt that he didn't truly trust her. She felt suffocated, not just because of Clarissa, but because of everyone around her, including Benjamin. She wondered if the former Duke had deliberately hired the woman who was once supposed to marry her father, and whether Benjamin would have taken her seriously if she had complained about the former Duke instead of Clarissa. Ultimately, she reminded herself not to get her hopes up. Savina politely thanked Benjamin for his understanding. Benjamin informed her that the prince would be arriving soon and the manor would be busy, so arranging a new teacher might take some time. He also mentioned that Fabian would be returning soon, which surprised Savina. She recalled her strained relationship with Fabian, her cousin and the son of the Duke of Charlotte. He had always been hostile towards her, often setting her up or subtly turning others against her. She had thought she could relax after Fabian returned to the academy, but now the thought of both the prince and Fabian being present filled her with anxiety. Benjamin further explained that Fabian would be taking a leave of absence from the academy during the prince's visit, even postponing his graduation, as it would be considered disrespectful not to personally greet the prince. Savina found this absurd, feeling that being expected to avoid Fabian was equally disrespectful. Benjamin then told her that a family dinner would be held soon and Lady Annabelle would be invited. He insisted that Savina attend and be introduced to the family. Savina simply said softly that she would remain silent so as not to make Lady Annabelle uncomfortable. This left Benjamin momentarily speechless before he finally dismissed her. As she left, Savina thought that Benjamin clearly didn't care about her well-being. He hadn't even asked if she was all right. She had to accept the reality that they weren't a real family. Now, her only goal was to avoid the prince and the Duke. Rumors spread among the maids that Madame Clarissa had been dismissed for injuring Lady Savina. Fear and unease rippled through. Lady Savina suddenly found herself confronted by Madame Vanessa, who arrived unexpectedly. When the maids voiced worries about being discovered, Vanessa dismissed their fears, stating that if the Duke and others were truly attentive, they would have noticed long ago. She instructed them to treat Lady Savina politely from then on, reminding them that Savina was still acknowledged as a member of the Charlot family. Melissa applied medicine to Savina's burned thigh, while Savina reflected that she no longer had to attend Madame Clarissa's classes or encounter her again. After enduring torment for so long, she was surprised by how swiftly the issue was resolved, but believed it was the best outcome. She murmured that getting hit was worth it, which startled Melissa. Savina realized that Melissa likely interpreted her words as a warning and was now afraid. Although Melissa never directly bullied her, she consistently ignored the harassment. Savina noted that she hadn't anticipated Melissa going to fetch the Duke during the argument with Clarissa, but even so, that wouldn't change. Savina gently told Melissa not to be afraid, which startled the anxious maid. She reassured Melissa that what she did wasn't unforgivable and that she didn't even possess the authority to punish her. Overwhelmed, Melissa clasped her hands and tearfully apologized, admitting she felt guilty for remaining silent while Savina was being mistreated. She confessed that at one point she reported everything to Madame Vanessa, but Vanessa told her to pretend she hadn't seen anything. Savina was shocked to hear this about the headmaid. Melissa sincerely promised that from now on, she wouldn't overlook anything that could harm Savina. Savina asked Melissa if she could truly trust her to protect her in the future, specifically questioning whether Melissa would prioritize Savina's instructions over those of the current and former dukes. Melissa was speechless at first, then confessed that she had a younger sister the same age as Savina back home. She explained that every time she saw Savina suffer, it was like seeing her own sister suffer. Because of this, she swore to obey Savina's instructions from now on. Savina smiled with satisfaction and immediately asked Melissa if she knew which room on the second floor the prince would be staying in. Savina recalled that in the original novel, her character was merely background, only mentioned in flashbacks. She knew how Savina died in the story, but not why. Despite the former duke's order to avoid the prince, she realized it wouldn't be easy to hide in the same mansion for 6 months. With determination, she limped to the prince's room and stood outside, confirming that this was indeed where he would be staying. Then, Savina quietly slipped into the prince's room, observing how much of the outside could be seen from the windows. Her goal was to avoid any encounters with him. After observing, she discovered that the annex where she would be staying was completely invisible from the prince's room. This brought her a sigh of relief and a sense of security. Just then, 2 maids in the hallway heard a strange noise coming from the room. One insisted she had heard something, so they entered together to investigate. Panicked, Savina hid under the table. The maids searched briefly, found nothing, assumed it was just the wind, and left. After they left, Savina, still shaken, reminded herself to leave the room quietly. She was determined to keep her visit a secret, feeling slightly reassured that the annex was out of sight. In the following days, Savina pondered that since she already knew the story's development, she had a better chance of survival than the original Savina. She was particularly wary of the male protagonist, a terrifying madman feared even by his own mother. While the Empress might not directly kill Savina, she knew she was still capable of terrible things. She hoped that if the Empress sent him to the battlefield, she might have a chance to save her own life. Looking around the room, Savina noticed that although the furniture was old, it was meticulously maintained, as if someone had been carefully preserving it. She wondered if the room had belonged to her father, but quickly dismissed the thought, convinced they would never preserve his room with such respect. While exploring the room, Savina heard a clicking sound and discovered a hidden compartment in the desk. Inside, she found a leather-bound notebook and wondered why it was hidden so secretly. Just then, she heard voices and became instantly alert. She quickly hid the notebook inside her clothes, deciding to take it with her. She successfully slipped out of the prince's room undetected. She noticed everyone around was unusually busy, even though Lady Annabelle's arrival was still some time away. Suddenly, she bumped into Fabian, who coldly remarked that it had been a while, though he didn't want to see her. Savina nervously left, realizing all the commotion was due to Fabian's early return. His return was much earlier than she had anticipated. As Fabian approached, Savina tried to politely suggest he rest after his long journey. However, Fabian mocked her, saying she lived in the manner to be treated like a noble lady and should try to please him, as he would be the next duke. Savina scoffed internally, knowing she was only allowed to stay because of her mother, and doubting she would even live to see him become duke. She bluntly told Fabian she had no reason to please him, implying her days were numbered. Fabian was shocked by her boldness, accusing her of finally showing her true colors, but Savina didn't care. She thought, since her fate was already tragic, why bother enduring pointless insults? Fabian angrily yelled at Savina, accusing her of being ungrateful and saying she should be sent to a remote boarding school. Savina, however, became intrigued by the suggestion. Fabian assumed she would beg him not to send her away, but Savina readily agreed, even offering to ask the Duke for the transfer herself. Savina thought this was a perfect opportunity. If she moved to the countryside, she could avoid the dangerous prince. Once she became an adult and independent, she wouldn't have to rely on the Charlotte family anymore. With her knowledge of the novel, she even believed she could succeed. Savina casually told Fabian to inform the Duke to send her to boarding school, teasing that it was a rare occasion they agreed on something. Fabian, flustered and annoyed, insisted that kicking her out wouldn't be a big deal. But Savina further provoked him, asking what he was waiting for. As Fabian stammered, she mocked his lack of courage to follow through. Enraged, Fabian grabbed her arm and shoved her to the ground, yelling at her furiously. He noticed a burn on her thigh, and his expression suddenly shifted to concern, demanding to know how she got injured. Savina checked her back, making sure the hidden notebook hadn't fallen out, relieved to find it still securely tied to her waist. She was taken aback by Fabian's sudden display of worry. This wasn't like him, she thought. Savina explained that the injury wasn't serious, that she'd been scalded by hot tea after Clarissa had hit her hand during a tea ceremony lesson. Fabian was furious that someone dared to hurt her, but Savina clarified that Clarissa hadn't been serving her at the time, but his father. She questioned why he was angry when she was the one injured, pointing out that he was acting like he cared. Startled, Fabian quickly denied any concern for her. He argued that he was only upset at the thought of her staying at home, adding that her commoner mother was already troublesome enough, and a scar would make her even less desirable for marriage. Savina scoffed at his excuse, feeling foolish for even momentarily believing he cared. She coldly remarked that he would probably continue his cruel words until she died, much to his surprise. As he stared in shock, she sarcastically told him to keep his voice down, informing him that his crazy cousin was going back to her room to rest. She added that he shouldn't forget to ask the Duke to send her away, even to a mental institution if he wished. After she left, a bewildered Fabian, unsure if she was mocking him, angrily yelled after her to stop it. Savina fumed inwardly, finding it laughable to call someone like him family. Back in her room, she calmly asked Melissa to make her some tea. Seeing Fabian at the door, a frightened Melissa quickly shut it. Fabian continued knocking incessantly. Melissa anxiously asked if something had happened. Savina nonchalantly replied that Fabian had done similar things before and to bring the tea after he left. Melissa was clearly worried. Savina took out the book she had found in the secret compartment, ready to examine it closely. Meanwhile, outside the room, Fabian pounded furiously on the door, yelling for her to open it and to talk to him. Just then, Duke Benjamin appeared, sternly asking Fabian what he was doing. Startled, Fabian quickly covered up, claiming he was about to greet his father. But Benjamin wasn't fooled, stating that Fabian's shouting could be heard throughout the entire manor. He told him to stop wasting time and come with him. Fabian obediently followed. Inside the room, Melissa brought Savina a cup of tea. Savina thanked her as she flipped through the mysterious notebook. Melissa curiously asked what it was, saying she'd never seen it before. Savina lied, claiming she found it outside and was looking for its owner. Melissa asked if she'd found them. Savina closed the book with a satisfied smile and said she had. The next morning, the manor was in chaos, servants rushing around, shouting instructions, and preparing ingredients for dinner. Annoyed by the commotion, Savina wondered why they were starting so early. She quickly remembered Lady Annabelle's impending arrival, a significant event. The Duke of Charlotte's wife had died from an epidemic 10 years prior, and the former Duke had always disapproved of his son remaining single for so long. Now, the Charlotte family was preparing to welcome Lady Annabelle as the new bride, as per the deceased Duke's arrangements. Melissa entered the room to help Savina dress, but Savina, having slept poorly, rose sluggishly. She had hoped to sleep in longer, especially since she no longer had Clarissa's lessons. As she moved, the bandage on her leg slipped, revealing the burn. Surprised, she asked Melissa if Dr. Eugenia had visited her last night. Melissa confirmed she hadn't. Curious and concerned, Savina asked Melissa to leave, insisting she could prepare herself. Alone, she examined the wound, shocked to find it completely healed. She was puzzled. Dr. Eugenia hadn't returned, and no one in the manor possessed such healing abilities. She couldn't understand how the wound could have healed itself. Savina pondered the two types of healing powers: divine power, wielded by priests, and magical power, used by mages. However, since healing was considered a sacred act connected to the divine realm, mages possessing such abilities were exceedingly rare. Therefore, Most people relied on priests for healing. Although their services were expensive, the Charlotte family, with their wealth and influence, had employed a mage with healing abilities as their private physician. Savina began to suspect that this might be related to the mysterious healing of her burn. She realized that only she and Melissa had been in the room since morning, so she decided to experiment. She cut her finger with a knife, and to her astonishment, the wound healed instantly. Savina was so shocked she could hardly believe her eyes. She finally understood that the healing power came from within her. This confirmed that her hidden power had finally begun to manifest. In some cases, such power required external stimuli, like contact with high-purity magic stones or assistance from a high-ranking mage, to artificially open the magical pathways within the body. Savina recalled that although she had regularly received magic potions from Madame Clarissa, her power had never shown any signs of awakening. She couldn't understand why it was manifesting now. Just as she was pondering this, Melissa knocked, interrupting her thoughts. Melissa informed her that the Duke summoned her downstairs. Savina decided to wait for Dr. Eugenia's return, hoping the healing mage could help her understand this sudden awakening. Deep down, Savina began to yearn. If she could use this newfound power to heal others, perhaps she could cure her mother's illness and finally escape this suffocating life. Savina walked down the hallway, passing Fabian, who immediately mocked her choice of attire. Savina ignored his sarcasm and continued on her way, but Fabian followed, accusing her of moving to the countryside just to be treated like a true noblewoman, admired by naive village girls. He insisted she was running away from her current reputation, but she calmly told him to think what he liked. Fabian warned her that even in the countryside, people would gossip, rumors would follow her, and he predicted she would eventually be isolated and forced to return. Just then, Benjamin appeared, causing both Savina and Fabian to pause. Fabian tried to act nonchalant, saying he was just chatting with his cousin, but Benjamin sternly told him to stop his nonsense and reminded them that Lady Annabelle would be arriving soon. Not long after, Annabelle arrived at the manor. She formally introduced herself as Annabelle Rose Maria, thanking everyone for inviting her to the Everton residence. Benjamin greeted her politely, shaking and kissing her hand, while her grandfather remarked that it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. Annabelle inquired solicitously about her grandfather's health. Savina observed from the side, thinking that although both Annabelle and Benjamin had been married before, their demeanor showed no trace of past heartbreak. She noted that Annabelle was renowned for her beauty in high society, and the Charlotte family was also known for their handsome features, making the two of them look particularly well-matched. Annabelle greeted Fabian warmly, praising him as an intelligent and capable student at the prestigious Raoul Academy. Fabian responded with a graceful smile, saying it was his honor to be recognized by such a beautiful lady, and then respectfully kissed her hand. Annabelle complimented his elegant manners. When her gaze shifted to Savina, the girl quickly curtsied and prepared to introduce herself, but Annabelle completely ignored her, turning to Benjamin and suggesting they go inside. She mentioned she hadn't eaten lunch due to nerves and was now quite hungry. Savina froze, realizing Annabelle had deliberately ignored her. She recalled the past, how her parents had left the Charlotte manor and married in a small chapel, but the Charlotte family had never acknowledged her mother, a former maid, as her father's legitimate wife. Therefore, both the family and outsiders like Madame Clarissa regarded Savina as Liam's illegitimate daughter. No wonder Annabelle ignored her. During the meal, Savina could only find solace in the delicious food. Everything else about dinner was unpleasant. The former Duke and Annabelle were the only ones engaged in enthusiastic conversation. The current Duke of Charlotte appeared indifferent. Savina felt resentful of the antiquated notion that men must remarry after becoming widowers. During the meal, Benjamin suddenly engaged Savina in conversation, catching her somewhat off guard. He asked if her recent lack of lessons had affected her studies. Surprised by his concern, Savina replied that she had resumed reading various books in preparation for her upcoming lessons. When Benjamin asked what she had been reading recently, she mentioned a book titled The Dynamics of Geography and Economics and an article analyzing recent tax law changes. Although she knew the material was quite advanced for her age, Savina was determined to prepare thoroughly, intending to start earning money as soon as she left the Charlotte estate. During their conversation, Lady Annabelle remarked that Savina seemed very intelligent and inquired if she had tutor. Benjamin explained that Savina's tutor had recently been dismissed due to personal reasons, but assured her that a replacement would be found soon. Lady Annabelle, however, disagreed, believing that at Savina's age, a formal school setting with peers would be more suitable for both learning and socialization. She suggested sending Savina to a reputable boarding school, implying that Benjamin needn't raise his niece personally. Her words caught Benjamin off guard. Savina thought that Lady Annabelle wasn't entirely wrong. She actually longed to attend boarding school. However, she also recognized this as another attempt to oust her from the Charlotte family. Glancing at Fabian, she expected him to support Lady Annabelle's suggestion, but was surprised to find him silent. She wondered if he was simply slow to react or if his silence was a deliberate protest. Meanwhile, Lady Annabelle continued, stating that while the Duke was a good man, Savina's father, Sir Liam, had been irresponsible. He had neglected his duties as heir and made a terrible decision based on a single mistake. Casually continuing her meal, Lady Annabelle haughtily declared Sir Liam's fate heartbreaking, claiming it was a tragedy how pressure could lead someone to make a life-ruining decision. Her words hung heavy in the air, creating an awkward atmosphere. Her grandfather cleared his throat, and Benjamin interjected, prompting Lady Annabelle to quickly amend her statement, claiming she spoke out of sympathy, not malice. However, she then cast a derisive glance at Savina, claiming Sir Liam was innocent and had simply trusted the wrong person. She continued her pointed remarks, insinuating that a lowly commoner had shamelessly seduced her master and questioning Savina's parentage, implying she might not even be Sir Liam's biological daughter. Savina clenched her fists, silently enduring the insults. Benjamin sternly told Lady Annabelle that she had eaten enough and should leave the table. Surprised and confused, she questioned his meaning. With a firm tone, Benjamin demanded she rise and leave, then instructed the maids to pack her belongings and prepare a carriage. Lady Annabelle frantically attempted to apologize, but Benjamin cut her off, announcing that the wedding would not take place and the dinner was over. Shocked and furious, she stood abruptly, accusing him of cruelty over a trivial matter. She turned to her grandfather for support, but was met with silence. Benjamin emphasized that the most important virtue in marriage was mutual respect and reminded Lady Annabelle that it was his decision to allow Savina, the maid's daughter, to live in his home. He implied that true respect meant treating Savina as family. Due to Lady Annabelle's harshness and prejudice towards Savina, Benjamin informed her they were not suited for marriage. Savina felt confused and saddened, unsure of what had transpired. She thought the Duke rarely became upset over such matters. She wondered if he felt offended that an outsider like Lady Annabelle dared to judge his family. Lady Annabelle continued to argue, stating that Savina was merely a maid's daughter. The words stung Savina, reminding her once again of her precarious position within the household. Benjamin firmly reminded Lady Annabelle that Savina was not just any commoner. She was the daughter of his brother, Liam Charlotte, and that maid. And the maid whom Lady Annabelle insulted was the woman Liam had deeply loved. He stressed that regardless of her origins, Savina's mother deserved more respect than a gossiping woman like Lady Annabelle. Lady Annabelle was thoroughly embarrassed by the rebuke. Benjamin then declared the dinner concluded and told Savina and Fabian to return to their rooms. Noticing Savina's distress, he inquired about her injured leg, which she insisted was fine. However, she worried that she was the reason the Duke's marriage had failed and dreaded facing the former Duke. Her grandfather, Benjamin, suddenly approached and lifted her into his arms to carry her back to her room. Despite her protests, she was bewildered by his actions. Savina didn't understand why he was doing this, feeling both embarrassed and nervous. She worried that the former Duke would blame her for everything, especially since Benjamin had never shown such affection before, not even a pat on the head or a hug. She hesitantly told Benjamin that he shouldn't have treated Lady Annabelle that way, as she was supposed to be his fiancée. Benjamin calmly explained that he was never obligated to marry Lady Annabelle based on a few conversations. He had never intended to marry her and had already informed the Maria family that Fabian was his heir, but they had refused to accept it. Continuing the engagement would only lead to further complications. Hearing this, Savina finally felt relieved. Savina realized the broken engagement wasn't her fault at all. It dawned on her that Benjamin had intended to end things from the start, perhaps even orchestrating the entire scene to formally dismiss Lady Annabelle. She suspected the former Duke was also involved. This brought her a sense of relief, knowing she wasn't the cause of the upheaval. Benjamin gently helped Savina onto the bed. She bowed to him, thanking him for what he had done. Benjamin asked curiously why she always addressed him as Your Grace. Savina replied that it was the proper and respectful form of address. However, Benjamin insisted that from now on, she should call him uncle and his father grandfather, not Your Grace. When Savina hesitated, Benjamin firmly told her the matter wasn't up for discussion. Although Savina wanted to point out that changing the way she addressed them wouldn't change how she was treated, that she still wasn't truly seen as family, she swallowed her words. Benjamin confidently told her that she was a member of the Charlotte family and she shouldn't let anyone look down on her. Savina silently nodded in agreement. Benjamin told her to rest well. That night, as Savina drifted off to sleep, she recalled the events of the novel she had been reading. The Charlotte family, as a prominent family in the Empire, frequently appeared in the book, especially in scenes where Benjamin confronted Ricardo, the male protagonist who sought to seize power. While the book never detailed the family's internal relationships, the absence of a duchess implied Benjamin never remarried. This brought Savina a sliver of comfort, meaning she wouldn't have to face a potentially abusive new family member. She decided that the evening's dinner hadn't been so bad after all, and drifted off to sleep peacefully. The next day, Savina began packing her belongings. A maid suggested she use a larger trunk. Savina declined, explaining she only needed a few clothes for the annex. She reasoned that she wouldn't be allowed out during the prince's visit anyway. The only thing she truly wanted to take was the notebook she had discovered a few days prior. Just then, Fabian stormed into the room, furiously accusing Savina of not only ruining his father's life, but also interfering in his marriage. Savina sighed, realizing he didn't understand the implications. She calmly explained that if Lady Annabelle became his stepmother and bore the Duke a child, that child could eventually threaten Fabian's position as heir to the Charlotte family. Fabian scoffed, saying he was well aware of that risk, which was why the marriage had been delayed for so long. By the time a potential younger sibling grew up, he would already be an adult. However, Savina pointed out a more crucial point. A child with a living mother held a more secure position, and the Duke was still young and wouldn't step down before that child matured. The Maria family wouldn't miss the opportunity to exploit this. She then revealed that the Duke had told her that the Maria family had refused to accept Fabian as the next Duke, which was why the engagement was called off. Hearing this, Fabian was stunned, realizing his father had made this decision for him. A grateful smile touched his lips. Savina looked at Fabian, thinking he was still too naive. Then she turned to the maid. "Let's go, Melissa." Melissa obediently picked up Savina's luggage and followed her. Fabian trailed behind them, panting and complaining as they climbed the stairs. "My legs hurt. Why is your room so high up?" he grumbled. Savina thought to herself that she hadn't asked him to follow. She didn't mind the fourth-floor attic room. She considered it a perfect hiding place, especially since the prince would likely never venture up there. When they finally arrived, Melissa opened the door and gasped at the state of the room. Even Savina was taken aback, and Fabian cried out in disbelief. "How can it be this filthy? Is this really the room my father assigned you?" he demanded, realizing it was essentially a storage room. Fabian angrily demanded an explanation, clearly displeased with the situation. Savina looked at the bed in the corner, blaming herself for letting her guard down after the Duke's kindness the previous day. She knew the servants wouldn't dare assign her such a dirty room unless the Duke himself had ordered it. Fabian turned furiously to Melissa, demanding to know why the room was in such a state. Flustered, Melissa stammered that Madame Vanessa had instructed her to prepare this room for Miss Savina. Upon hearing this, Fabian immediately told Melissa to fetch Vanessa. Shortly after, Melissa returned with Vanessa. Vanessa calmly told Fabian that she was just about to show Miss Savina her new room. Savina, watching Vanessa avoid even looking at her, thought bitterly that Vanessa had never intended to help her at all. Her excuses were nothing but lies. Savina recalled Melissa confessing that she had once reported the mistreatment to Lady Vanessa, only to be told to ignore it. Reflecting on her experiences in the Charlotte household, Savina realized that nothing ever went smoothly when Vanessa was involved. Meanwhile, a furious Fabian demanded to know what Vanessa thought of the filthy room. Vanessa feigned ignorance, prompting Fabian to angrily shout, "Does this look like a room fit for a lady of Charlotte?" Just as the tension escalated, Savina tried to interject, But Vanessa abruptly shifted the blame to the former Duke Charlotte, claiming she was merely following orders. Her words left the room in an awkward silence. Savina was speechless, while Vanessa looked at her with a triumphant, mocking gaze. Annoyed, Savina told everyone to stop talking, insisting that she would stay in the room and demanding they all leave. Melissa politely suggested they speak privately. When only Vanessa and Melissa remained, Melissa hesitantly asked if the former Duke had truly chosen this room for Savina. With a sly smile, Vanessa confirmed it, saying she was instructed to prepare an inconspicuous room, which she felt was fitting for a maid's daughter. Meanwhile, Fabian, frustrated by Savina's stubbornness, pleaded with her not to stay in such a poor room. But Savina surprised him by laughing. She teased him about his sudden protectiveness and pointed out the irony of him saying the room wasn't fit for a lady of Charlotte like her. Fabian, stung by her sarcasm, asked if that was all she had to say to someone trying to help. Savina retorted that she could curtsy if he wanted. Fabian angrily warned her to stop with the sarcasm, saying his patience was wearing thin. Savina shot back, demanding to know what he thought he was putting up with. She emotionally pointed out that the head maid's rudeness and the dilapidated room weren't coincidental, but a deliberate attempt to hide her away. She angrily revealed the truth. They wanted to hide her because she was illegitimate, a disgrace unworthy of appearing before the royal prince. And all of this was because he, his father, and his grandfather had consistently ignored her existence. Fabian was stunned into silence, filled with anger and pain. Savina told Fabian that if he thought she hated others the most, he was wrong. She hated him the most, even more than Vanessa and the maids who looked down on her. She firmly ordered him to leave, go back to the academy, and never appear before her again. Though hurt, Fabian respected her wishes and turned to leave. Savina sat alone in the corner of the dusty, abandoned room, silent and filled with sadness and self-reproach. She felt the room symbolized her true place in the world, the disgrace of the Charlotte family, the shameful child of common blood, and a painful reminder of the love affair that ultimately led to Liam's death. Close to tears, Savina felt utterly broken. She questioned what she should do, admitting she couldn't endure it any longer. At first, her only goal was to avoid the prince and survive, but now, her disappointment with the Charlotte family had surpassed everything. She didn't want to stay here any longer. She had thought that after angering Fabian, he would force her to leave, but unexpectedly, he started to sympathize with her, which confused her. Since no one was willing to drive her away, she began to consider asking the Duke to send her to boarding school. However, she then remembered that the Duke had broken off his engagement with Lady Annabelle for her sake. Given his pride, he probably wouldn't agree to send her away. Realizing this, she understood that besides the head of the family, the only person who had the right to decide her fate was her grandfather. The scene then shifted to him. Savina realized she needed to talk to the former Duke, Charlotte, her grandfather, but she hesitated, as in these 3 years, she had never taken the initiative to discuss personal matters with him. She knew she needed someone who understood Simon Charlotte. Her gaze fell upon her diary, thinking it might help her prepare. Mustering her courage, she walked towards the kitchen, her sudden appearance surprising all the maids. She calmly told Vanessa that she wanted to use the kitchen and needed someone who could cook. Vanessa asked suspiciously why. Savina replied that she wanted to make something and it wouldn't take long. Vanessa agreed, but made it clear that the maids were off duty now, and no one had to help unless they volunteered. However, none of the maids offered their assistance. Vanessa smugly remarked that it seemed no one was willing to help and was about to leave when Savina stopped her with a pointed question, asking if she knew why Lady Clarissa was driven away. When Mrs. Vanessa appeared confused, Savina explained that it was due to a slight mishap on her part and warned her that offending people with her words was just as wrong. Savina's words clearly struck a nerve with Mrs. Vanessa, who twitched in anger and muttered under her breath that she would remember this. Savina scoffed indifferently, saying she didn't believe her. Mrs. Vanessa turned and left in a huff. The nervous maids also quickly made excuses to leave. Savina was left alone in the kitchen, and soon Melissa entered with the supplies. Savina asked if she had brought everything, and Melissa cheerfully confirmed that she had. Savina smiled, thinking that she had anticipated Mrs. Vanessa wouldn't let the maids help, so she had prepared in advance. Savina and Melissa worked together to prepare the dishes, and during their conversation, Melissa was surprised to hear that the former Duke suffered from insomnia. She said he wasn't the type to admit his suffering, and she only confirmed it after asking his personal maid. She curiously asked Savina how she knew, and Savina hesitated, only saying that someone had told her. A flashback then revealed the truth. Savina had found a diary signed L. Charlotte and realized it belonged to her father, Liam Charlotte. Since then, she had spent almost all her free time reading the diary, trying to imagine her father's life at Everton Manor when he was young. Reading her father's diary, Savina discovered that her grandfather's insomnia had worsened after her grandmother's death. The diary mentioned that the former Duke had even started drinking, which wasn't like him, perhaps because he was struggling to cope with the loss of his wife. Savina was particularly touched by one detail. Her grandmother used to make chamomile tea with honey, and that warm aroma was now gone from the house. Thinking about this, Savina realized that the father-son relationship between her father and grandfather was perhaps much more ordinary than she had imagined. She was surprised to discover that the seemingly impeccable former Duke also had such human weaknesses. But now, she felt she could use this opportunity to get closer to her grandfather. Melissa was surprised and curious why Savina suddenly wanted to talk to the former Duke. It was something she had never attempted before. Savina confessed that if she didn't take action, she felt like she would die. Although she hadn't put much emotion into preparing the food, she knew very well that she could only leave the Charlotte family by putting in more effort. Melissa was moved by Savina's struggle, lamenting that it was unfair that the former Duke didn't see her efforts to be a good granddaughter. Seeing Melissa suddenly sobbing, Savina asked her in confusion what was wrong. Melissa half-jokingly suggested giving the uncracked walnuts to the Duke, but Savina refused. She explained that the reason she wanted walnuts was because everyone said they helped with sleep, and it was also related to the tea she had prepared. Melissa excitedly offered to get more walnuts, but Savina firmly refused, saying the current amount was enough. Afterward, Savina mustered her courage and brought the tea to her grandfather, Simon Charlotte. Simon asked her why she had come, and Savina hesitated. She reminded herself not to be afraid. Facing her grandfather was no more terrifying than death. She composed herself and politely asked her grandfather if he could spare some time to have tea with her. Though surprised by the timing, Simon was drawn by the aroma of the tea and invited her in. Savina thanked him, respectfully addressing him as Your Grace. As she entered the room, she silently encouraged herself, saying that she only needed to do one thing next. Once inside the room, she would ask her grandfather to send her to boarding school, believing this would please him. Melissa placed the teapot on the table, and Savina politely asked her to leave. After Melissa left, Savina poured tea for Simon and encouraged him to try it. Simon took a sip, finding the tea sweet, and briefly recalled that this was exactly how Savina's grandmother used to make it. However, he quickly dismissed the thought, believing Savina couldn't possibly know. Seeing the walnuts on the table, he asked about them, and Savina invited him to try some. She explained that they were roasted walnuts, lightly drizzled with maple syrup, not too sweet, and could be enjoyed with the tea. Simon tried one and admitted that they were indeed quite good. Savina gently explained to her grandfather that walnuts helped improve sleep, and she thought they would make a good snack. Simon was surprised and asked how she knew he wasn't sleeping well. Savina sincerely replied that she had noticed her grandfather had been working tirelessly for the family and simply hoped he could rest well at night. Simon then asked if she had made them herself, without the help of a cook. Savina admitted that she had asked Mrs. Vanessa for help, but the housekeeper had refused to let the maids participate, so she had to do it herself. This angered Simon. He felt Mrs. Vanessa had overstepped her bounds by refusing his granddaughter's request. He firmly stated that he would speak to Mrs. Vanessa and ensure she apologized to Savina. Savina sincerely thanked her grandfather, feeling a rare sense of gratitude that his imposing personality was finally on her side. She recalled another instance of Mrs. Vanessa disregarding her, forgetting that as long as Savina bore the Charlotte name, not even the former Duke would tolerate such disrespect from a servant. Actually, it was Melissa who had prepared the food, but no one knew because the other maids had already left after their shift. As Simon sipped his tea, he asked her the real reason for her visit. Savina humbly admitted she had come to apologize. She apologized for the disruption caused by Lady Annabelle during dinner. However, Simon frowned and immediately dismissed her guilt, stating it wasn't her fault. Savina then realized everything had been prearranged, and she had merely been a pawn. Regarding this premeditated plan, she confessed to Simon that, although she couldn't speak up at the time, she didn't think Lady Annabelle's suggestion was bad. She was referring to the idea of sending her to boarding school. Simon then asked why she wanted to go to such a school, catching Savina off guard. Internally, she admitted the real reason was her hatred for the mansion and everyone in it. More importantly, she feared for her life if she stayed, especially because of Prince Ricardo. Suppressing her emotions, Savina told Simon she simply wanted to make friends. Simon, however, dismissed this idea, saying she was too weak and too young to live in the remote countryside. When Savina mentioned Fabian attending the academy at the same age, Simon firmly stated that Fabian was different. He was a boy, the heir to the Charlotte family, and no one would dare harm him. In contrast, Savina's birth made her vulnerable, an easy target. He explained that this was why he fought so hard to protect her reputation. He urged her to become stronger and more capable, so that in the future, if anyone tried to suppress her because of her birth, she could surpass them. He firmly told her not to mention leaving again, at least not until she was truly ready, emphasizing that these words were for her own safety. After Simon's lecture, Savina's mind raced, filled with conflicting emotions. She recalled how he, more than anyone, had belittled her, making her birth an issue. Yet now he spoke like a caring grandfather, claiming everything was for her own good. She understood that if she revealed Mrs. Vanessa and the maid's mistreatment, he would punish them, but not for her sake, but to uphold the Charlotte family's reputation. The thought that even her family couldn't truly accept her left her feeling lost and disheartened. Feeling the conversation was fruitless, she decided there was no point in staying. As she rose to leave, Simon unexpectedly stopped her, asking if she could occasionally bring him tea like she had today. Savina was puzzled by his sudden change of heart, wondering if the tea had reminded him of his deceased wife. Savina smiled and agreed. If Simon was willing to go to the annex, she would prepare tea for him. It was also the place where he had once struck her. She thought that with Prince Ricardo arriving in 2 days, it would be difficult for her to leave the annex again. Disappointed, she thought her plan to be sent to boarding school had completely failed, and she wondered if she should simply run away. Later, Mrs. Vanessa bowed to Savina, admitting she had overstepped. Savina teasingly asked which part of her behavior had been inappropriate. Mrs. Vanessa humbly apologized for not allowing the maids to help Savina, and for the past mistreatment. Savina was surprised to see Mrs. Vanessa, who had always bullied her, now bowing and apologizing. She thought that having someone powerful intervene was indeed effective. She then questioned Mrs. Vanessa further, implying her transgressions went far beyond that. Visibly startled and remorseful, Mrs. Vanessa expressed her deepest apologies, but struggled to say more. Unmoved, Savina told her she could leave if she was finished. However, Mrs. Vanessa didn't move, leaving Savina perplexed. Then, Mrs. Vanessa hesitantly revealed that the former Duke had suggested her daughter become Savina's companion. If Savina agreed, she would arrange for her daughter to move in with her. Savina recalled the former Duke's suggestion about Mrs. Vanessa's daughter becoming her playmate, realizing it might be a response to her earlier desire for a friend. She scoffed at the proposal, cynically thinking it was like offering a hostage. Seeing Mrs. Vanessa's nervousness, Savina asked, with a sardonic smile, how old her daughter was and what her name was. Mrs. Vanessa replied that her daughter, Vivian, was 12. Sensing her hesitation, Savina accused Mrs. Vanessa of not being sincere about wanting her daughter to be her companion. Mrs. Vanessa denied it, but Savina continued to taunt her, implying Savina wasn't considered a proper noble young lady and might do something unpredictable, like hitting her playmate or abandoning her. Mrs. Vanessa's tone remained mocking and sharp. Mrs. Vanessa knelt before Savina, terrified, begging for forgiveness and pleading for her daughter, who she insisted had done nothing wrong. Savina reflected inwardly, wondering what she herself had done to deserve such treatment from Mrs. Vanessa and the others. Mrs. Vanessa groveled at her feet like a dog, desperately seeking pardon. She promised to serve Savina faithfully from then on. Savina felt disgusted by this woman who had once looked down on her and now suddenly displayed such subservience. She coldly asked Mrs. Vanessa for a favor. Still desperate, Mrs. Vanessa immediately agreed without hesitation. Savina stood up and firmly instructed her to find out Prince Ricardo's schedule and report it to her. Mrs. Vanessa hesitated, startled, and worriedly expressed that revealing the prince's itinerary was a serious matter. However, Savina reminded her that her grandfather had specifically warned her against interacting with the prince, and if they happened to meet, it would cause trouble. She added a thinly veiled threat, stating that if Mrs. Vanessa refused to help and something went wrong, she would have no choice but to report it to her grandfather. Intimidated, Mrs. Vanessa agreed to do as Savina asked. Savina acknowledged Mrs. Vanessa's compliance, stating she had made the right choice, and then suddenly hinted that after the prince's departure, she might reconsider having Mrs. Vanessa's daughter as her playmate. Mrs. Vanessa hastily expressed her understanding, and Savina warned her to serve with even more dedication in the future. As Mrs. Vanessa left, her face clearly flushed with resentment, she bumped into Melissa. Melissa excitedly praised Savina's confidence in handling Mrs. Vanessa, admitting that even as an adult, she found Mrs. Vanessa intimidating. However, Savina calmly replied that Mrs. Vanessa wasn't scary, just intensely repulsive. Melissa confessed that at Savina's age, all she knew how to do was laundry. Savina responded that that was already quite impressive, surprising Melissa. Inwardly, Savina sighed, thinking that having a simple skill like laundry must have been a blessing during a carefree childhood. She contrasted how, under different circumstances, youth could be an excuse or a weakness. Savina realized that if she could overcome the current predicament of avoiding the prince, she might finally have a chance to grow. She loathed being a child, feeling powerless, non-threatening, and dependent. This painful self-awareness had been deeply ingrained on the anniversary of her father's death, during her first year at Everton Manor. Savina recalled how, after moving into Everton Manor on the first anniversary of her father's death, she had become emotionally fragile, like a child. Perhaps out of fear of loneliness, she yearned for comfort and a sense of belonging. So she decided to seek out the former Duke, Simon, thinking they could reminisce about her father together. However, as she approached his room, she overheard him angrily berating a maid. He was furious that the maid would even consider letting Savina in, and his harsh words broke her heart. The maid emerged, shaking her head silently. Savina silently accepted the rejection and turned away. Heartbroken, she realized that placing hope in others was a mistake, painfully aware that she had no real family in this house. That night, emotionally devastated, she wept bitterly. Savina finally understood that she had to survive on her own. Unlike the real Savina, who was still a child, her fragmented memories allowed her to think like an adult, which offered a small measure of solace. The next day, she received a paper with the prince's schedule and began analyzing it. She discovered that the prince spent most of his time in the swordsmanship training hall, and as long as she dined in the annex, she could avoid him. Her only concern was Sunday morning service, as the prince, being a member of the royal family, would attend. Although she found the prince's apparent devotion to the national religion somewhat unusual, she concluded that as long as he was in the church, she would be safe in the main building. Just then, Melissa knocked, announcing Dr. Eugenia's arrival. Savina calmly told her to show the doctor in. Dr. Eugenia entered and greeted Savina, mentioning she'd heard about the burn. Savina explained that she had accidentally spilled hot tea on herself. Dr. Eugenia, concerned, offered to remove the bandages and examine the wound, but was surprised to find no trace of a burn. She suspiciously asked Savina if she had lied. Savina calmly replied that the wound had miraculously disappeared overnight. Dr. Eugenia sighed, saying that if Savina had fabricated the story to get Mrs. Clarissa fired, it was a clever tactic, and if Savina wanted others to believe this version, she would play along. However, Savina clarified that it was the Duke himself who dismissed Mrs. Clarissa after seeing the real wound, insisting she hadn't lied. To prove her point, she picked up a sharp object and deliberately injured herself. She offered to demonstrate on the spot. Dr. Eugenia, startled by Savina's self-harm, quickly and nervously grabbed her hand. Dr. Eugenia insisted the wound needed immediate treatment, but she quickly froze in astonishment as the new injury vanished completely. Confused and shocked, she asked Savina how the wound could suddenly heal. Savina then countered, asking why Dr. Eugenia had helped conceal the truth earlier, knowing she was lying. Perhaps out of sympathy or pity, Savina speculated. Having witnessed Mrs. Clarissa's mistreatment firsthand, Savina guessed that Dr. Eugenia didn't want to interfere with her attempts at self-preservation. Savina then made a request, asking Dr. Eugenia to help her in a different way, by keeping her mysterious healing ability a secret. Dr. Eugenia was surprised by Savina's request to keep this miraculous ability hidden. Dr. Eugenia asked if she should at least inform Duke. Savina calmly explained that she didn't intend to hide it forever, but she needed time. If the adults discovered her ability, they would likely assign her new tutors immediately, and she couldn't be sure they wouldn't be as cruel as Mrs. Clarissa. She wanted to conceal her ability until she was strong enough to protect herself. But Savina knew this was only part of the truth. Her real fear was that if news of her rare ability spread, it would reach the prince, who might try to eliminate her, or would attract the attention of the current or former Duke Charlotte, neither of whom she trusted. Dr. Eugenia agreed to keep Savina's healing ability secret until she was ready to reveal it. Grateful, Savina asked if her ability could also be used to heal others. Dr. Eugenia confirmed that it could, explaining that healing was a selfless power. Being able to heal herself was only the first step, but she cautioned Savina that further training was needed to hone her skills. It wasn't an all-powerful gift. Savina felt discouraged, realizing her current ability was useless in helping her mother. She wondered how long she would have to study alone before mastering it. Dr. Eugenia encouraged her, saying Savina would surely progress quickly. She offered to tutor her personally twice a week for 2 hours each session, assuring her that living in the annex would help keep the secret. Savina was initially amused and pleased to be personally tutored by Dr. Eugenia, a skilled magician with healing abilities and a former professor. But her mood quickly turned somber as she worried about being unable to afford the tuition. Dr. Eugenia gently reassured her that responsible adults didn't charge children, especially not for education. She explained that such care was the responsibility of parents or guardians, and that she was already being paid for her time, since the lessons would be during her working hours. Despite this, Savina remained dejected and uneasy. Dr. Eugenia asked to borrow Savina's knife. Surprised, Savina handed it over. To her shock, Dr. Eugenia lightly cut herself with the knife. Savina reacted immediately with alarm. Dr. Eugenia explained that those with healing abilities typically wouldn't subconsciously heal themselves unless they sensed danger. But Savina's body automatically healed even the smallest wounds. This indicated her ability was exceptionally powerful. The revelation stunned Savina into silence. Dr. Eugenia gently added that perhaps one day she too would learn from Savina. If, by then, Savina still wished to repay her, she could. Recalling Dr. Eugenia's promise, Savina wondered if her ability was truly as powerful as the doctor claimed, or if she was simply trying to comfort her. But one thing was clear. This was the first time someone had shown her genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. It warmed and comforted her. She nodded in agreement. Savina then noticed the cut on Dr. Eugenia's hand and asked when she planned to heal it. Dr. Eugenia uttered a casual oops and then healed the wound with healing magic. She then asked Savina if her earlier act of self-harm had frightened her. Savina nodded silently. Dr. Eugenia smiled and admitted that she herself had been startled at the time. She gently urged Savina not to hurt herself again, reminding her that even with rapid healing, there would still be pain. She emphasized that as a healing magician, Savina should aim to heal others, not just herself. These words resonated deeply with Savina. She thought to herself that Dr. Eugenia was right. This was precisely why she wanted to learn to become stronger. Since moving into this mansion 3 years ago, she had received no news of her mother's recovery. Considering the Charlotte family's power and wealth, their supposed inability to cure her mother seemed suspicious. Savina began to suspect they never truly intended to help her mother. Realizing this, she resolved to stop relying on them. She would hone her abilities and heal her mother herself one day. Later, during a carriage ride, 2 young men appeared, one of them a knight. The knight informed the other, a prince, that they had arrived at the Everton estate of the Charlotte family. Though not yet at the main house, he cautioned the prince to be careful, especially to avoid a repeat of the incident at the royal palace. Prince Ricardo, with a sardonic smile, brought up the time he supposedly tried to murder the queen, his own mother. He laughed, questioning whether she genuinely believed he would do such a thing. However, the knight felt uneasy. He noticed the prince's eyes held no anger or madness, but were completely empty, devoid of emotion. It chilled him to the bone. Even with the unsettling expression, Prince Ricardo whispered in the knight's ear, warning him not to look at him with judgment, lest others discover his imperfections. Later, upon arriving at the palace, he was warmly welcomed by Benjamin Charlotte, the current head of the Charlotte family. Benjamin expressed his immense honor at hosting the prince, even if only briefly. The scene then flashed back to a shocking moment, with the queen lying on the ground, bloodied, seemingly struck down by Ricardo, filled with fear and despair. She questioned him, asking what she meant to him, if he felt anything at all, if he could experience true joy, mourn another's death, or even understand why she wept. But Ricardo remained expressionless, simply replying that he didn't know. In truth, Prince Ricardo wasn't normal. He knew his own abnormality better than anyone, making the queen's questions utterly meaningless. Back in the present, Fabian approached Prince Ricardo, asking if he liked his accommodations. Ricardo replied that the room was quite nice, and he was looking forward to his stay. Fabian was pleased, thinking it had been a good idea to show the prince around the estate. Being of similar age, he hoped they could become friends quickly. Fabian then suggested a tour of the gardens. However, Ricardo brought up a previous conversation with Benjamin, where he had inquired about the Charlotte family's young lady. Ricardo had asked about his niece, wondering why she hadn't come to greet him. Simon had explained that his granddaughter was unwell, recuperating in the countryside, and regretted missing the opportunity to meet the prince. Ricardo, with a knowing smile, repeated the word recuperating, his tone laced with suspicion. Back in the present, Ricardo questioned whether the young lady's health was truly so dire as to require treatment in the distant countryside, especially at such a young age. Fabian hesitated, then admitted she wasn't actually ill. When Ricardo asked the real reason, Fabian explained that his cousin's mother was of low birth, a source of shame for his father and grandfather, who didn't want her to meet the prince. Unexpectedly, Ricardo stated he wasn't one to judge based on birth. Fabian was surprised by Ricardo's open-mindedness, so different from what he'd expected. He recalled Savina's anger when the family tried to hide her from the prince. Now, seeing Ricardo's reaction, Fabian thought perhaps a meeting wouldn't be so bad. Fabian smirked, deciding to disobey his father's warning to keep Prince Ricardo away from the annex. Just one visit wouldn't hurt, he thought. He offered to take the prince there, anticipating Savina's gratitude. Meanwhile, at the annex, Melissa informed Savina that Fabian wished to see her in the back garden. However, Savina, engrossed in her book, refused, telling Melissa to inform Fabian that if he needed her, he should come himself. Savina was irritated, wondering why she had to obey Fabian's every whim. She reminded herself that today was the day of the prince's arrival, and she must remain hidden in the annex. Fabian should be focused on pleasing the prince, not wasting time summoning her. Clearly displeased, Fabian stormed into Savina's room, demanding to know why she hadn't met him in the back garden. Savina calmly replied that she thought their last conversation had been clear enough. Fabian retorted that it hadn't been a conversation at all, as she had done all the talking and hadn't listened to him. Savina reminded him of her promise not to bother her again. Vivian was caught off guard by Savina's words and could only admit she hadn't realized Savina felt that way. Savina, expressionless, said it wasn't surprising. Someone like him, who had never truly experienced loneliness and helplessness, could never understand. She accused him of sleeping soundly even while tormenting his defenseless cousin. Fabian grew impatient, telling Savina he didn't have time to argue and insisted she come downstairs. Savina firmly reiterated her refusal to go, pointing out that he always ignored what others said. Fabian claimed she would change her mind once she knew why he wanted to meet her in the garden, but Savina remained skeptical, dismissing his claim. Fabian retorted that he was actually trying to help her achieve her wish, but her stubbornness was making things difficult. He then started searching for something, warning her that if she refused again, he would have to take action. Savina remained unconcerned. She wondered what absurd idea he would come up with next. Suddenly, Fabian picked up Savina's father's diary from the table. This action shocked and worried Savina. She yelled at him not to touch it, demanding he put it back immediately and warning him not to anger her. As she tried to snatch the diary back, Fabian deliberately held onto it, asking her what she would do if he didn't return it. Savina anxiously pleaded with him, telling him how much the diary meant to her. Fabian, however, taunted her, running off with the diary and challenging her to catch him. Furious, Savina chased after him, determined to retrieve her precious diary. Rushing into the garden, she saw someone she thought was Fabian and hurried after them. Unexpectedly, she bumped into Prince Ricardo. Realizing who it was, she froze, stunned and nervous. At that moment, she thought bitterly that perhaps her biggest obstacle wasn't the prince himself. It was Fabian. She was furious that Fabian had forced her into this situation. Fear and tension filled the air. The scene shifted to Prince Ricardo, recalling the situation regarding Savina. He instinctively sensed that Fabian's explanation about the family being ashamed to introduce the girl due to her low birth was a lie. Ricardo believed they weren't ashamed, but were making excuses to hide the girl, preventing the mad prince, accused of attempting to murder his mother and abandoned by his family, from seeing her. He saw right through their intentions. They were clearly protecting Savina from him. But to Ricardo, all these efforts were ultimately futile. Inwardly, he criticized the entire family, finding Fabian, despite being raised as the heir, utterly foolish. He noticed Savina's obvious fear. He had initially wanted to take the girl to meet Duke Charlotte to see his reaction, but now he found the whole situation disappointing and pathetic. He decided to frighten Savina a little and then let her go. Savina knelt before Prince Ricardo. She bowed respectfully, apologizing for offending him by unexpectedly encountering him near the annex, and begged for his forgiveness. When Ricardo asked for her name and identity, Savina lied, claiming to be Vivian, Miss Savina's playmate. She knew she couldn't reveal her true identity. She used the name of the head maid's daughter, the girl the previous duke had wanted to become Ricardo's companion. Ricardo told her to rise and continued his questioning. She replied that she was merely accompanying Miss Savina. Ricardo mentioned hearing that the duke had adopted his deceased brother's daughter. Savina seized the opportunity to say that he would have met her if he had arrived earlier, adding that Savina would regret missing him. She requested to leave, but Ricardo questioned why she remained at the estate if her mistress was ill and recuperating in the countryside. Savina was momentarily at a loss, but managed to maintain her composure, telling Ricardo in a trembling voice that she was the head maid's daughter and therefore couldn't leave the estate. She explained that Miss Savina was too ill to even speak, which was why she had stayed. Inwardly, Savina was panicking, realizing Ricardo was testing her and hoping he wouldn't see through her lies. With a faint smile, Ricardo replied that since Miss Savina was unavailable, Vivian, Savina disguised as Vivian, should attend to him during his stay. Savina was shocked and afraid. She realized this meant she would have to interact frequently with the prince. Fearing this was how Savina and Ricardo met in the original story. She suspected the previous duke had also hidden Savina's identity in the story. Despite Ricardo being a prince, she feared concealing her identity would ultimately lead to her demise. Now trapped by her own lies and unable to disobey a royal command, Savina knew she had no choice but to obey. Smiling, Prince Ricardo assured Savina he wouldn't let her work for free. He intended to inform her master and arrange for her to formally enter his service. Panicked, Savina immediately tried to refuse the offer. She worried that if the former Duke Charlotte learned of her contact with the prince, he would be furious. She feared he would send several maids to the annex to keep watch over her. This would likely expose her secret lessons with Dr. Eugenia. To de-escalate the situation, Savina politely declined any payment, saying it was an honor to serve the prince. Since Miss Savina was absent and she had nothing else to do, she offered to be at the prince's disposal at any time. Ricardo praised Savina's loyalty. Meanwhile, Savina decided to appear obedient for the time being to avoid angering him. She thought to herself that if Ricardo showed any unusual behavior, she would find a way to escape. Ricardo assured her he wouldn't take up too much of her time and told her to see him after his sword practice, promising to let her leave before dinner. Savina respectfully agreed to his arrangement. As she quietly followed Ricardo, Fabian hurried over and asked if the prince had spoken with her. Ricardo calmly replied that he had, adding that the girl was perfectly capable of serving Miss Savina. Hearing this, Fabian looked confused. Ricardo pointed out that he was referring to the girl who arrived after Fabian and questioned why he was still standing there. Caught off guard, Fabian stammered an excuse, claiming he had urgent matters to attend to at the annex and requested to return later. Ricardo agreed without objection, and Fabian nervously departed. Alone, Ricardo sneered, clearly having seen through Savina's true identity. He remarked sarcastically that if they were going to lie to him, they should at least get their story straight. He scoffed in disbelief that Fabian, the heir to the Charlotte family, was even more foolish than the girl presumed to be a bastard. Meanwhile, Savina was trembling after her unexpected encounter with Prince Ricardo, hardly believing she was still alive. Just then, Fabian approached, urgently asking what she had said to the prince. Savina didn't answer. Instead, she snatched her father's diary from Fabian's hand and ordered him to follow her. In a secluded cottage, she angrily demanded to know why Fabian had brought her before the prince. Fabian, misinterpreting her reaction, smugly assumed she was there to thank him and claimed he hadn't helped her for gratitude. But Savina furiously demanded to know how he could make such a significant decision without consulting her. Startled by her anger, Fabian insisted he was only trying to help her achieve her wish. Confused, Savina asked when she had ever said such a thing. She paused, recalling Fabian's earlier mention of hiding in shame, and began to suspect his true motives. Slowly, Savina pieced things together. She realized Fabian must have misinterpreted her earlier words to believe she wanted to see the prince. She thought in frustration, when had he ever cared about her wishes? She was speechless at his constant presumption. She then explained that she had lied to the prince, claiming to be the head maid's daughter. Fabian immediately realized that the playmate the prince mentioned was Savina herself. She further informed him that Ricardo had asked her to act as his playmate and requested to meet at the annex after his sword practice. Shocked, Fabian demanded to know why she was dragging him into this, believing it was solely her lie, but Savina firmly reminded him that he was an accomplice. Fabian became defensive and resentful, accusing Savina of using her lies to put him in a difficult position. Savina calmly shifted the blame back to him, stating that it was his grandfather who instructed her to pretend to be a maid if she encountered the prince. Fabian was taken aback by this, hesitant and surprised that such an order could have come from his grandfather. Sensing his confusion and guilt, Savina seized the opportunity to further manipulate him. She reminded him that it was because of his actions that she had encountered the prince. If he truly felt guilty, he should obey her instructions. She wondered if Fabian, who had always looked down on her for being a maid's daughter, was now starting to feel sympathy for her. She then threatened that if he didn't cooperate, she would tell the former duke that Fabian had deliberately set her up to meet the prince, knowing full well he feared punishment. Flustered, Fabian tried to defend himself, claiming his intentions were good, but Savina coldly cut him off, ordering him to do as she said and stop stammering like a fool. Fabian nervously warned Savina that her actions could lead to her arrest for committing a heinous crime against the royal family. But inwardly, she scoffed at his ignorance, realizing he was referring to the crime of deceiving the royal family. Later, when Savina met Prince Ricardo, she greeted him politely, noting Fabian's presence. Ricardo teased that Fabian seemed eager to stay by his side, expressing surprise at his sudden loyalty. To cover himself, Fabian claimed it was his duty to ensure the prince's satisfaction. Meanwhile, Savina remained inwardly displeased, thinking to herself that despite all his complaining, Fabian had shown up after all. Since her current predicament was his fault, she planned to use him as a shield if anything went wrong. Though she found him foolish, she believed he was capable of protecting himself, having learned the Charlotte family's water magic. Noticing Fabian's presence, Prince Ricardo suggested a friendly archery competition to see who was more skilled. Trying to maintain her composure, Savina offered to prepare the bows and arrows. Anxious, she couldn't help but wonder if even someone as unpredictable as the prince would truly harm someone after just meeting them. As Ricardo prepared for practice, he casually asked if her name was Vivian. After she nodded, he playfully called her Vivian. He then asked who she would be cheering for, suspecting it might be a test of loyalty. Savina immediately replied that she would, of course, be supporting him. Prince Ricardo asked Savina why she chose to cheer for him instead of Lord Fabian. She was momentarily speechless, unsure how to respond. Inwardly, she admitted she would support anyone who opposed Fabian, even the elderly butler, Oliver. Ricardo pressed her for an honest answer, so Savina flattered him, saying it was because he was taller, more handsome, and had a better personality than Fabian. Ricardo laughed and teased Fabian, suggesting he be nicer to his servants. Irritated, Fabian argued that he hadn't mistreated anyone and called Savina an ungrateful girl. Prince Ricardo playfully asked Lord Fabian if he was upset that Savina had chosen to support him. Visibly caught off guard, Fabian stammered a denial, saying he didn't mind. Ricardo then laughed and said that since the little maid was supporting him, Fabian should at least win the archery competition so his pride wouldn't be wounded. The competition began. They took turns shooting arrows. Fabian hit the bull's eye every time, while Ricardo missed every shot. Despite this, he remained unfazed, casually praising Fabian's archery skills and his accurate aim. Fabian, somewhat perplexed, breathlessly and humbly accepted the compliment. However, Savina watched all of this with suspicion. She saw through Ricardo's facade, understanding that he was deliberately missing every shot. It wasn't a lack of skill or bad luck, but intentional, clearly some sort of plan or mind game. This made him appear even more unpredictable and dangerous in her eyes. After losing the archery match, Prince Ricardo turned to Savina, saying she must be disappointed that he lost so badly after she cheered for him. Savina quickly reassured him, saying it was just practice and no big deal. But Ricardo pointed out that her cheering for him might have caused Lord Fabian to resent her, and he didn't want things to end that way. To compensate her, he offered, with a hint of amusement, to catch something for her as a memento. He raised his bow and suddenly shot down a bird flying across the sky. Savina flinched, her heart racing. Seeing him hit the flying bird so easily and accurately, Savina felt his dangerousness even more acutely. Ricardo casually remarked that he hoped the bird hadn't fallen somewhere difficult to retrieve. Savina wanted to help retrieve it, but Ricardo stopped her and ordered Lord Fabian to fetch it, saying he couldn't let a young girl go alone. Fabian, taken aback, froze, while Savina remained tense and uneasy. She realized Ricardo's unpredictability was even more unsettling than she had imagined. When Ricardo suggested Fabian retrieve the bird, Fabian sarcastically retorted that Savina wasn't actually young and that her mental age was probably closer to a 30-year-old woman. Ricardo calmly replied that although Savina was clever, she was small and would get tired walking far. Fabian argued that Ricardo didn't understand her true capabilities at all. This made Savina notice a subtle shift in Ricardo's expression, his face suddenly turning cold. She quickly offered to go herself, but Ricardo interrupted her, criticizing Fabian for lacking even the most basic consideration for a lady. Fabian, flustered, tried to defend himself, but eventually relented and went to retrieve the bird. Savina was filled with anxiety, realizing she was now alone with Prince Ricardo, the very situation she had been desperately trying to avoid. She nervously wondered if she should find an excuse to follow Fabian, afraid of what might happen in the prince's presence. Ricardo suddenly called out to Savina, startling her. She asked if he needed anything, but he calmly suggested they rest until Fabian returned. After a while, Savina spread a mat on the ground. Once Ricardo sat down, he invited her to sit beside him. She hesitated, saying she didn't dare. But Ricardo smiled gently and reminded her not to disobey his orders. Left with no choice, Savina reluctantly sat beside him. She felt extremely uneasy, wishing she were with someone else, like the former Duke Charlotte or her friend Melissa, who was preparing refreshments. Suddenly, Ricardo casually took off her hat, which startled Savina. She quickly questioned him. He playfully said the sun was too bright and he wanted to borrow it. Then, without a care, he covered his face with her hat and lay down, leaving Savina bewildered and nervous. Savina sat beside him, tense, worried about her hair being exposed in front of Prince Ricardo. As a member of the Charlotte family, she had distinctive features. Her light hair shimmered softly in the sunlight, complementing her bright blue eyes. Although the prince had already seen her face, she worried that if he noticed her hair, he might recognize her as a Charlotte. She hoped he wouldn't notice these details. For a moment, she sighed softly, feeling a rare moment of peace. But Ricardo suddenly commented that her hat smelled like violets. Savina quickly explained that it was probably the scent of her hair's soap, her anxiety growing. She remembered from the original story that Ricardo had a keen sense of smell, even able to distinguish the scent of the female protagonist. When Fabian returned, Ricardo admitted to being bored and asked Savina to tell him about herself. She tried to avoid the topic. Savina said she had no special stories to tell. But Ricardo insisted that the storyteller didn't determine whether a story was interesting or not. Savina felt the pressure of maintaining Vivian's false identity, realizing how difficult it was to lie. When Ricardo asked her age, she replied that she was 12, which made him chuckle. He then teased her, saying she must have experienced a lot in life. He also asked if being Miss Savina's playmate was difficult. Savina calmly replied that it wasn't, explaining that Miss Savina didn't like her, so they rarely spent time together. Ricardo then asked why Miss Savina disliked her. Savina explained that it was probably due to the strained relationship between Savina and her mother, the housekeeper. Ricardo asked curiously, then who was close to Miss Savina. Savina was caught off guard, suspicious of his intentions. She wondered if he was trying to uncover Savina's true identity, but maintained her disguise, replying that no one was close to Miss Savina. When Ricardo asked why, she bluntly stated that no one in the family cared about Miss Savina, so naturally, no one was close to her. Ricardo expressed surprise, saying he thought Miss Savina was everyone's darling. Savina, with a touch of defiance, immediately corrected him, saying he was mistaken. Hadn't he heard the rumors? She pointed out that the Charlotte family's illegitimate daughter, referring to herself, was constantly bullied by everyone, a pitiful creature. She insisted that anyone who had witnessed how the former Duke Charlotte treated her would never think she was cherished. Ricardo scoffed, suggesting that perhaps it was all out of love. This annoyed Savina. She thought he didn't understand reality at all, adding that Miss Savina would be hurt to hear such words. Ricardo playfully reminded her that it wasn't Miss Savina listening to him now. He then stood up and gently placed the hat back on Savina's head. He suggested she should advise Miss Savina to change her perspective and learn some life skills. Savina responded firmly and with displeasure, stating that a family that only showed kindness through manipulation wasn't a real family at all. She grew increasingly irritated, wondering why Ricardo was interfering in her family affairs, especially since he himself had been kicked out of the palace for falling out with his mother. Ricardo, with a calm smile, admitted she was right, which surprised Savina. He turned to leave, and Savina, after a moment's hesitation, called out to him, reminding him that Fabian hadn't returned yet. As he walked away, Ricardo said, "Perhaps it would be better if Fabian didn't return," pointing out that Vivian didn't seem to like her master's family. Vivian was speechless, thinking to herself, Prince Ricardo was like a beautiful painting, seemingly perfect, yet lacking authenticity. His smile felt rehearsed. She wondered what it would be like to live a life where one could never truly smile or laugh. Later, as she returned to her room, she breathed a sigh of relief. The day had passed without incident, and she could finally look forward to some relaxation. Savina was startled to find Simon already in her room as she entered. He was waiting for her, asking where she'd been, catching her completely off guard. She nervously wondered if he knew about her encounter with Prince Ricardo, but reassured herself as he didn't appear angry. Hesitantly, she asked him why he was there. Simon casually replied that she had once offered to make him tea if he ever visited. Savina was taken aback by his sudden reason, confused. When had they become close enough to share tea? Just then, Ricardo's words echoed in her mind about changing perspectives and learning to survive. Savina recalled her painful past, remembering the way the former Duke of Charlotte had looked at her, not with hatred, but with a yearning for his obedient eldest son, her father. But that sentimental gaze hadn't lessened her suffering, nor did it excuse the Charlotte family's cruelty. She still harbored deep resentment towards them. And now, Simon had appeared. Using the maid's absence as an excuse, Savina explained that making tea would take a long time, hoping he would leave. Though she tried to hide her true feelings, she expected him to reprimand her for her lack of hospitality. However, Simon simply said they could skip the tea and just talk, leaving Savina stunned. Simon asked Savina if the tea she had made for him before was inspired by something her father had said. Savina frowned, realizing the conversation wasn't about her, but about her father. She firmly denied any connection, and Simon admitted he shouldn't have asked. He began to reminisce about how Savina's grandmother used to make him honey chamomile tea. To his surprise, Savina picked up the thread, saying she knew about it, not from her father, but because he had taught her himself. Simon pressed her further. She confessed to having read it in her father Liam's diary. Simon eagerly asked where the diary was, but Savina lied, claiming it had been burned with her father's belongings after the funeral as a kind of memorial, which wasn't true. Simon believed her explanation without a doubt. Savina thought to herself that she would never share her father's memories with the Charlotte family. When Simon asked if she remembered anything else from the diary, especially anything about him, Savina lied again, saying that aside from the tea recipe, there was nothing about the Charlotte family. She added, "It was for the best, as the diary would only bring shame to the family if anyone were to see it." Simon's expression turned noticeably sad and defeated. Savina, disgusted by his reaction, recalled how Simon had once called her father a disgrace to the family. She coldly told him to leave, as it was almost dinner time. Simon agreed, but paused before leaving, reminding her about the fifth prince's arrival. He advised her to stay in her room, as the prince frequented the training grounds, and to inform him immediately if she encountered him. Savina calmly agreed. Simon attempted to console Savina, acknowledging that living in the annex could be stifling, but promised to send her some things to pass the time. Just as he pushed the door open to leave, Fabian stormed in, furiously berating Savina for leaving without informing him. He froze when he saw his grandfather, Simon, standing there and nervously greeted him. Simon sternly reminded him to mind his manners. Noticing the dead bird in Fabian's hand, Simon asked what it was. Fabian quickly lied, claiming it was a gift for Savina. Seemingly oblivious to the tension, Simon encouraged Fabian to visit Savina, often to keep her from getting bored. Fabian readily agreed, while Savina felt misunderstood, silently wondering how Simon could be so oblivious, thinking she and Fabian were genuinely close. With that, Simon finally left. Fabian, brimming with discontent, questioned Savina about what she and his grandfather had discussed, insisting that if Simon had come all this way, it must have been important. Savina brushed it off, saying it was nothing, but Fabian wasn't convinced. Fabian angrily held up the dead bird, saying he had gone to great lengths to find it and was angry that Savina had left without telling him. Feeling cornered, Savina accused Fabian of always taking his anger out on her while remaining silent in front of the prince. Fabian retorted, angrily asking if she truly believed Prince Ricardo. While admitting that Prince Ricardo might have a better personality, Fabian insisted they were equally handsome and accused Savina of flattering the prince solely because of his status. Savina was puzzled by his complaints, her mind more preoccupied with the bird Fabian had brought. Fabian boasted about being a better archer than the prince. He also claimed the bird was merely injured and easily caught. Savina, however, realized there was more to it. This was no ordinary bird.